and thank you all for joining us today. Let's dive into it. I think the talks have been increasingly getting more and more technical, and would love to top it off with going deep into agentic architectures today with you all uh, as we kind of pioneer the agentic era for 2025. But to kick us off, right, like in the last 3 weeks itself, I've met several teams across different verticals, several leadership teams as well. And the term agents itself is quite overloaded. So as we go deeper into it, I'd like to set the record straight and set a baseline of what are agents, what do we mean by agents, and uh, who better than Joe here, founder of Crew AI, to tell us about his perspective there.
How are you doing today?
Great, great, awesome.
I love it. All right. So AI agents, that's a good question. I feel like everyone can agrees and disagrees on it at the same time. So it's a little weird. For me, it's very simple. For me, having an agent is about having agency. So regular flows, that is if this, then that call LLMs, that is not an agent for me. For me, an agent is something that controls the flow of the application. It uses an LLM as a brain to kind of decide and have some reasoning on how to go about things. But in the end of the day, it's deciding what tools to use it, when to use it, how to format the answer, how to go about a thing. And that would be, for me, the base definition of what an agent is, something that has agency.
Absolutely. And to think of that, we think of agents as like a planning phase and an execution phase. But when we go into the architecture itself, like what are some of the key components? And this is a question for all three of you. When we think about building agents, what are some of the most essential components of the agentic architecture? And it's already been established, it's well beyond RAG plus prompts, right? So love to get your perspectives there.
You go first.
Sure. Hey everyone. Look, I think the interesting thing is that, this is a kind of a special moment. We're almost at the 2-year mark, from the release of ChatGPT. And we started out by using just what's in memory in the models, right? And we dusted off that meta paper and we hooked that sucker up, right, to all the crazy stuff Bob's been building, right? And the thing was alive, right? So you help counter some of the 3 problems of just using what's in memory in the models, which is that models are frozen in time, they don't have access to private data, and they tend to make stuff up, right? And so RAG became, a dominant paradigm. Interestingly, in order to actually put these things into use, but to actually drive towards multi-step process automation, which is kind of how I think about the business value of it, right? You need to take the models, you need to take the prevailing RAG architecture, and then you need to be able to set that into motion. I think that's what's really exciting about what the folks over at Crew are doing and others, which is highly variable depending on the types of agents that you're working on, right? And that you're wanting to set in motion. And so, from that standpoint, it depends on you could think about what's going into a Tesla and the self-driving mode, right? As agentic, it perceives the world, it makes decisions, and then it takes action, right? Which might be different from a trading bot that a hedge fund might use, right? And so depending on the types of agents, right? Different frameworks are needed, different model hosting and serving capabilities are required, right? And so going all the way down to the cloud architecture and the hardware, I think it's fairly variable depending on what the actual business or operational use case is for the agent, and what data needs to make available to it, and a host of other sort of related issues.
Certainly. Bobs, you want to go next?
Yeah, I don't have much to add there. So thanks for having me, by the way, Josh. But I think what Joe said is very interesting, right? So it's like if something has agency, so it can make a decision, are we going to go left or are we going to go right? Right. And rather than saying if this, then go left, else go right. there's some reasoning to it, right? So I think it's as simple as that. And the reason why it's so important is because if we look at data management and those kind of things, we kind of got stuck in that world, right? So low data quality, not getting to insights from your data, that's just still the number one problem with all the exciting stuff that's happening. So I recently had a conversation with a CIO, and he said it's all great what you guys are building over there. I said, wonderful. He said, but I still have like 15 ERP systems, and I can't make heads or tails of it, right? So if you can help me solve that, then that's the, and that's where, the agents, or as I like to say, the agentic way of doing stuff comes in, right? And that's where the value is going to come from. And let's bear in mind that RAG, I run Luijt, so I'm very happy with RAG, right? For you can imagine why. But the thing is, it's also one dimensional, right? Or one directional, I should say. And there's a lot of exciting stuff that's happening. Thanks to this agentic way of thinking, where we're going to loop that information back into the database, right? And that we really start to build smarter systems. And that is extremely exciting. And that goes back, because now I can go back to that CIO and say, like, what, maybe there's a way to help you solve that problem that you have. So it's it's exciting times. And that's what the agentic way of thinking is solving.
Yeah. And to add a few things to that, I think you got me in the head. Like, we definitely have seen kind of like a few plateaus as we go, but like we keep like finding these other things that unlocks more stuff. And honestly, I think like agents, like as we start, are usually kind of like straightforward, right? You're like, hey, I have an LLM, I have tools, I have a task, I will give you an outcome. What I find though is that as you bring these things into production, especially like an enterprise company, then another like few other needs start to pop up. And those are more like regular, kind of like, how can I say, regular technology needs. We have seen this before, right? So it's like, oh, I want a caching layer. I want my agents using the same tools over and over. Oh, I want a memory layer. So it's not only about the caching, it's about being able to do the RAG, pull the context, create kind of like a long-term memory of everything that I have done and the things that I have learned. So I don't need to keep relearning them and everything along the way. And then also, of course, you go into the regular guardrails, and you want to have delegation, and you want to have everything in between. So I do find that these architectures, at least, they tend to start simple, but once that you go into production, especially on bigger companies, that security is another layer and distribution is another layer, then like you start to add a bunch of other components that kind of like can get the complexity to skyrocket a little bit.
Exactly right. I think this is great because like I wanted to cover. I mean, data is the backbone of of our agentic flows. But I think what I'm also seeing is that, for example, APIs. Let's say we want an agent to call an API effectively. Do we have a standardized spec for that API? Is that API changing over time? How do we make sure that the agent is able to call that API effectively? Like these are, I mean, this is just one small example. Then, as Joe mentioned, like security permissions. If you want the agent to act on our behalf, how do we make that actually how do we make that auth token sort of pass through towards the end system and get that as like get the action approved from the end system? Like who is authorized to make these agents take actions on their behalf? Some of these things, like we are still in the early stages, but in order to like truly make agents operational in production, some of the questions from the audience was also similar, like how do we have agents interact with ERP systems like effectively, right?
Yeah.
So um,
If I can quickly say something there, Josh, is like, I recently had a conversation with somebody, it was super interesting. And this person was, he was proposing to like have an add-on to the RESTful architecture, right? So that he said, like, if we see the return headers that are coming in an API call, he was proposing ideas where he would say, like, who's going to consume this information? And if then the return header would say, well, it's actually not a human or like system, but a model that's going to consume the information, then how you would format what was coming back would be different, right? And
Yes.
so I love how people are thinking about that, and how people are even going back in time to, in this case, RESTful architectures, to say like, can we do something there? To rather saying like, it's going to be consumed by humans, going to be consumed by an application or by model. So it's like there's a lot of exciting stuff happening there. And because I think that more and more of these interactions will be handled by models.
Absolutely. And I think one other kind of aspect that came up also in our previous discussions is with agentic workflows, the dependency on multimodal environments becomes even broader and even bigger. Right? I think question for you, Brian, on like how do you see kind of just the challenges with digesting multimodal information being kind of a blocker in some ways for some agentic workflows today, and what are we doing to get past that?
Yeah, I kind of break it down into 3 different buckets, and you could break this down in a number of different ways. The first is data availability. So, for example, like Bob and I were at a conference last week where a CIO said, actually, my number one problem right now for adopting generative AI is RBAC, is role-based access controls, and just managing that across, their enormous organization. What a boring topic and a boring issue to be blocking generative AI adoption, but like it's real.
Why didn't you
So-
say that, Brian? Why didn't you say that during the
Yeah.
But like it's true, right? Like this stuff. So data availability, data quality, structuring it. That's what Bob was just talking about, right? And that's where we see, embedding natural language or image data, whatever it might be. Generating triples, for example, indexing it in a graph to try and make RAG work better, whatever it might be. Changing how APIs deliver payloads, and then 3, like how you're actually serving that to the model. And this, right now, like for example, when we're using multimodal models, we're looking like with best in the business, we're still looking at like 20 or 30 seconds for inference on just like basic stuff, on just tiling PDF pages and boring stuff like that we do. Right. If you want this to be sub millisecond for, have like almost a human feel to this as sensor data is coming in, right? Then you need to be really thoughtful about like what sort of cocktail of models that you're using to power those models. Because this is something that Chip and the other panelists was talking about in the last panel, which is that like, look, sub 7 billion, sub 2 billion, sub billion text to text models might work absolutely fabulously for a lot of tasks, right? And so being really thoughtful about which models you're giving which workloads in order to deliver that business value, but you got to solve across that whole value chain if you're going to do that. I think stepping back, what I'm seeing, at least from like over the summer and into the fall, are lots of startups emerging to go grab data in the wild. So like kind of solve old problems, go rip, go crawl, scrape websites, rip the HTML, deliver it to the models. And then the stuff that companies like, I'm in part of the value chain at Unstructured, which is like get private data and deliver that in, as cleanly structured of a manner as you possibly can to help the models be successful. Because at the end of the day, the math is never going to change. You want to deliver to the context window exactly what the model needs, nothing more, as efficiently as possible if you want to minimize cost, time, and also maximize performance.
And accessing data is absolutely important. And I mean, I was at that conference as well, and like, just a question keeps coming up is like, how do we even let the right person access the right data and manage access that way? But from from the accuracy standpoint, right? Like Brian, that you mentioned, maybe Bob, I'd love to, and I know you have your hand raised as well, so feel free to chime in here. But Bob, how do we ensure like agentic workflows are going to need more specificity on the data that was provided, as part of the RAG outputs, and how are how are developers solving that today?
Yeah. So before answering your question, I really would like to comment something on the previous point, because
Yes.
I think we have a lot of people now listening and building, coming up with ideas and building these kind of applications. And I think so things like RBAC, etc., are more like, things that people need to go into production, right? And I really would like to urge people to just don't think back in time, don't think backwards, right? So we see that a lot of things that I see is like how people try to implement this is that they just basically slap on the old techniques to something new. But I really believe that with AI, we are like in this new paradigm, how we do stuff, right? So there are even new ways of doing, for example, RBAC. Now, what that means and how that works, I don't know, because if I would know, we probably would be doing something there. But the point is that this is the time, right, to come up with new ways to think about, because, RBAC is very binary, right? So it's like access or not, right? But what if it's like certain type of information or nuances of information that you're getting from the model? And I think that, startups that will emerge that solve that, right? So, but not in like the old way, but like in a new way, just leveraging the models to do, for example, RBAC or whatever. I really would like to urge people to, to keep thinking that step ahead. And then to answer your question, like how do people do it? Well, so one of the challenges that we have right now with with um, uh, with chunking and those kind of things is that sometimes the true value comes from more information where we don't have any access to, right? So let me give you an example. So let's say that you have like email, and we have like we have like a customer with a big use case with an email, and um, uh, and I happen to be using that application as well. So if I go like, okay, what time is my flight today, right? Then, it does like a hybrid search to the database. It's properly chunked. It goes into the model, and then it will return, I don't know, 1:15 p.m., right? But if I then ask the follow-up question, so, what terminal is it from? Then, the answer I get, like, I don't know. That information is not available. And one of the things that we've seen right now is that the chunking, and yes, sometimes it's hard and sometimes it depends on the information, but kind of the techniques are now kind of here, right? How to deal with that is that the bringing together also had like what stuff with Crew, etc. is doing is like bringing together different ways and different sources of information to really truly help the end user. That is stuff where I really would love to see more being built, right? So so RAG, one-dimensional RAG. So I often just draw it like as a line, right, from the query to the answer. Has brought us very far, but now we need to start to bring in loops, right? So what if you have more questions? What if we need to query multiple times? And that is something we at Luijt, we put a lot of work in that. So we'll probably get to that later. But the feedback loops to get might be multiple sources of information, do multiple queries from the database. That is going to be tremendously important because that's where the true value sits. And let's not forget, if we talk about what you just mentioned, right, with this one-dimensional structure, is like we only talk about reading, right? Reading information. So I have a query, you get a result, and it's presented to you. But what about writing? What if the agent you're talking to or you're interacting with is, what time is my appointment? And it says, oh, you don't have an appointment today. And what if I then say, okay, can you book an appointment for me? Right. So that kind of stuff, a lot of work needs to be done there. And it's happening, of course, but I would love to see everybody that's also listening to us right now, just, when we're done with our panel, to get their hands to the keyboard and help us build more of these kind of tools, right?
Amazing.
But after the panel, not now. After the panel.
Don't start yet.
I was just going to share, just for sake of just candor, a failure and a success that we've had, or let's say a probable success. On the failure, or at least we haven't cracked the code yet. We've been trying to use agents to help automate the setup of connectors. So I'm going to pull from Salesforce or S3, etc. Right? And it's a pain in the ass. Like we have we've sat live with like lots and lots and lots of users, and like the fastest folks have been able to set up a connector is like 15 to 20 minutes, often because it requires like emailing an admin to get certain permissions and so on and so forth. It's a giant pain in the ass. right? So we're like, oh, well, let's use let's use, agents for this. And it's proven incredibly difficult to have that work. So that's like the one we haven't cracked quite yet, in order to like productionize it and put it out in the wild for our users to leverage. On the success side, we're hoping to move this into prod somewhere time around like after Thanksgiving, around like reInvent 1st of December. But this isn't like it depends on how strict you are with the definition of agents. But with the definition I gave you earlier, we're looking at like dynamic pipelines where models are sampling data. Like say you're doing a fresh pull from S3, you sample it, you spin up, you run a bunch of different chunking techniques in parallel. You have models judge which kind of chunking strategy it prefers for that particular type of data, and then decides to implement that for that particular job. To do the same thing for embedding model selection, as like you could if you wanted to for embedding model selection, which might be problematic. But like for all these cocktails of models that our users rely upon to go from raw to like RAG ready data, so I can do a baton pass to Bob, right? You may have 6 or 8 different models along that, and it might vary wildly depending on the type of data that you're pulling from, right? On like which cocktail models and which settings make the most sense. And so we're trying to automate that, or at least make those dynamic by inserting one or more models to help perceive, decide and then act in terms of like adapting pipeline configurations autonomously.
Amazing. Joe.
Yeah, no, I want to touch on one thing that Brian said that I think is super relevant, and that is we are seeing a lot of people kind of like going after like use cases and agentic and getting burned, right? And sometimes it's not even about the tool that they're choosing; it's about like it's again. I think it goes back to what we're talking. It starts very simple, but once you get like you're like, all right, now when I get a reliable, consistent results, you're like, oh, all right, so there's a lot more that I need to put into this in order to get what I actually need from this. So there's definitely something that we are seeing where like some of our customers are coming to us saying like, hey, we do this, we have this thing, it kind of works, it's very promising, but it's not up to our standards. Like we need a few extra things. And other customers come up with like this crazy use cases, right? They're looking for 100% accuracy. And honestly, right now, it's not the time for that. Like you don't get 100% accuracy with AI agents. That's not how things goes. You can definitely get humans in the loop, and that brings you very close to it. But it's something that you need to be mindful of. So whenever somebody shows me, it's like, hey, I want to do accounting. I was like, well, you can definitely try it, but you're gonna have some humans in the loop there. Don't pretend that you're gonna like automate the whole thing end to end.
Absolutely. And Joe, to that effect, right? Like, what are on like moving on from the data to the application side? Like, what are some of the learnings or best practices for thinking about framing agentic flows so that you're not going down a rabbit hole? The best practices that we can share with all our listeners today on getting their agentic strategy right from the beginning.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to talk about that. So, from everything that we're seeing out there, we are seeing that it's definitely cross vertical. So, like, there's a lot of internal automations and operations that are like going on, and then you have like sales, marketing, research, and coding. So there's kind of like there's a healthy distribution. But what we're finding is that there is basically a normal distribution on the pattern of the use cases. So a lot of them are usually a combination of research, analysis, summarization, reporting. Sometimes it's not all of those together. Sometimes it's kind of like mix and match, but those work like a charm. So if it's like, hey, I want to pull data from somewhere, from an ERP, from a CRM, from somewhere else, and when I conduct some sort of analysis, I want to have a summarization of sorts, and I want to put off a report, either JSON or whatever it might be, so that I can push into another system. Those ones kind of like work pretty well. Then the other thing that people are doing that are kind of working great is this idea of like bringing human the loop when necessary. Like, hey, this is kind of like a use case we actually want to have human the loop. Like we're already saving a bunch of time on this, but I want to make sure that we get somebody in there. I would say that's the other thing. And the final thing that I want to mention is the way that you roll out these things in companies. So we have a great interview that went out last week with the commercial CTO of GenAI from PwC. And that's something that they had to taught like from the ground up because it's a big company. And when you're rolling out things like that, people start wondering like, all right, what role this AI agent's playing in here and how do I interact with them? So there's definitely a human component of like the companies they're promoting people to feel like you manage these agents now and they're a tool in your tool set. I can like having more success with that than others.
Awesome. Really quick, I guess. I know we're coming up on time, but the one thought that I'd love to end with is for each one of us uh, to highlight what needs to be addressed to make agentic workflow successful. Like what each one of us think is kind of one thing that we would love to have solved in the coming months for agentic workflows to see the light of day literally across all kinds of use cases.
Oh, I think the problem with the question is that one thing.
One thing.
All right, I'm gonna pick one. I'm gonna pick one thing. So from
And
everything
each of
that I
us can
have
pick
seen
one,
out there,
so we'll cover a few. But yeah, go for it.
deal. So is from everything that I have seen, the one thing that I think is a must-have for this future of agentic to live to its full potential is it needs to be fast and simple for companies to build them. There's many other things that I could mention here, like enterprise readiness, security, everything, and like and all those things are true. But I think the fast and simple is the most important thing because in the market that is moving so fast, if you say that companies need to spend like 5, 10 engineers for 3 months with a product manager and a designer to get like something like a POC done, that doesn't work. But if you make it that simple and fast to try things and throw things in the wall and see what sticks, that screws up the economic in a good way, where now companies can move as fast as the market and then double down on what works. So I would say that would probably be the most important thing from my point of view for the future of agents can like reach to its full potential.
All right, Bob, you're next. It gets harder for you and me, Brian.
Yeah. so I'm gonna be a little bit self-serving answering this question, but at Luijt we're super bullish on this concept of generative feedback loops.
Yeah.
So and very soon you can already read about it, and I'll share a link in a bit. But very soon you can play around with it, and it basically means that you can, rather than prompting the model, you prompt the database. And what you're basically going to say is that, for example, when you create a collection in the database, let me give you the simplest example that you can think of. They say, okay, let's say that you have products in e-commerce, like every product should be in English, right? American English. Then if you store something in Spanish, then it just updates that for you. It says like, well, and then you can choose as you use, do you want to keep the original content or do an upsert or those kind of things? But now also think about, for example, data management, right? So we have we now work with a data set, like a factory data set. And it says like, all temperatures from the ovens should be in Celsius. And then if somebody stores it in Fahrenheit, it just does an upsert. And it says like, well, it's now in Celsius as well. And so you prompt database rather than the model. And then you get full CRUD support. So the database can read more from the database. It can update in the database. If you can even delete if you wanted to. And it can create. So that is something we're super, super, super bullish on. And that's that's in the domain of the database. So basically, if you would be interacting to the stuff, that the folks at the crew or at the structure are building, then basically then the database gets smarter, right? And we call that agentic workflows, right? So the generative feedback loop is a form of an agentic architecture. And that is something I'm extremely bullish about. So very soon more and also for people to play around with.
That'd be awesome. Can't wait to try it. Actually, it'll actually inform a new way of querying data, of managing data in the agentic. That'll be awesome.
Yes.
Brian.
I'm look, I think this is, like a multivariate regression, like in which coefficients, like most, impactful to the outcome. Like I think just the pace with those models are improving is still really exciting. And, rumors are that GPT-5 is going to drop in December, right? And we're going to have even more performant and faster multimodal models. I think that's the long pole in the tent here for a lot of this. I think the stuff that João is working on is absolutely essential to being able to operationalize this and put this in the hands. But like at the end of the day, like it comes down to performance, which is what we were talking about earlier. And a lot of the performance rides on power and quality of these models. Like as we figure out ways to shrink them back down again, that's great, right? And means that they could proliferate and we could push them to edge devices. But at the end of the day, it's like my mom thinks it's a piece of crap and she doesn't use it. Like she doesn't use Siri. Like we're not there yet, right? And so I think that we're driving in that direction. I think we're like it's a shallow trough of shallow trough of disillusionment on agents for like 6 months in 2023, and like they're kicking ass. But like I think that we're driving hard towards that reality, and I'm bullish that in 2025 we're going to start getting there with a higher win rate.
Amazing. And I'll just add on to that, because like, we don't want to stay, it's great to have be able to build agents quickly in a more robust data driven manner. But in the end, from my perspective, I think we all want to build applications that can make it into production very quickly. And in the spirit of this conference today, I think one of the things that like I would love to really solve for personally, as well as the wonderful team at Galileo, is um, how can we enable not only building agents fast through a better data driven perspective, improving access to more data, but also having the right set of metrics that people can rely on right from the beginning, so that you're not building a POC in 3 months and then you're spending a year trying to productionize that, trying to make it better and useful. As you said, Brian, it should be robust and useful right from the get-go. And if you don't have the right signals for the entire agentic chain, it's because it's even more complex than a simple RAG setup. Um, it's going to be very hard for us to go from that POC to production stage without the set of observability and metrics. So, our team at Galileo is also innovating and training models and systems on algorithms on what do we call agentic evaluations. And we had Atin had a talk earlier with Chip and Vivian about this, but we've been thinking hard about this. We have some ideas too, lots more to come in this space, but I think without the right set of trustworthy metrics that teams can rely on, along with the data infrastructure and an easy way to orchestrate them. These are all the key building blocks here
Yeah,
to build the agents effectively.
yeah, and we now know that the best eval for an agentic framework is Brian's mom. So that's very
Exactly.
Love it. Love it.
Amazing. Well, thank you all. This was an amazing chat. We all had fun, and I'm sure our listeners and audience as well. And you guys have been super engaging on the chat as well, which is amazing. Thank you all for being here. This is awesome.
Thanks all.
Um,
bye bye. Cheers.